Some calming harp music for your listening pleasure on this Thursday evening. Here on Talk of the Bay, I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. And joining me is the Mayor of Santa Cruz, the first elected Mayor of Santa Cruz, I should add, Fred Keeley. Hi, Fred.
Hi, Rachel Ann Goodman.
Thank you for being here today.
It's
I appreciate
my
your
pleasure.
time.
It's
So
my
a couple
pleasure.
of headlines that might ring familiar to you. Frustrated by Washington, pro-Palestinian activists take their fight to City Hall. Ceasefire activists hope that City Council resolutions will send a message to the White House. One problem, local officials have little power. I'm going to read a couple more. From Washington, Seattle City Council passes, quote, watered-down call for ceasefire in Middle East. And then from Newsweek, a list of city councils who have passed ceasefire resolutions, which includes San Francisco, Oakland, Richmond, Cudahy, California. Do you even know where that is? So it's, I think, in Southern California. Bridgeport, Connecticut, Wilmington, Delaware, Atlanta, Georgia, Detroit, Michigan, Dearborn, Hamtramck, Michigan, Ypsilanti, sorry, Albany, and Akron, and Providence. So that gives you a sense. It's not, I don't know what those communities all have in common. I would say a lot of them are in California and Michigan, which is interesting to me. So there's a movement, it seems, that Santa Cruz is part of, where people are so frustrated because they can't get in touch with, in a lot of cases, their federal officials, and there's no public comment area for them to do this. So they're turning to their city councils because they have public comments.
Right.
And they can pass these resolutions. So to walk people through what recently happened at the city council on Tuesday last week. No, this week. Sorry, time goes by.
Last week.
Things went on for 10 hours in the public comment period. There was a resolution that had been drafted, but it didn't get voted on. The city council, two city council members brought a ceasefire resolution in front of the council, and from what I understand, the council neglected to vote on it. They included and passed an alternative resolution.
Right.
So that's up to this point. Windows were broken, things were thrown. There was a death threat against you, which was called credible. And that's just a very bare bones recounting. If you want to hear lots more, you can read Lookout Santa Cruz or any of the full, disclosures of Chris Neely's reporting, which get into much more detail about the happenings. But I want to start out asking you the question that I've been wondering about, which is, if the majority of the council did not want to take it up, why did they not want to take up the particular draft that the two city council people brought forward, which was Sonia Brunner and Sandy Brown?
Okay. So we have to start on December 12th in order to answer that question, which is that under oral communication, we took about 4 hours of comment from folks saying they hoped we would have something in front of us to vote on. We couldn't vote on anything on December the 12th because there was no agenda item. That was the first that we had been asked to consider that. So on December 12th, we took 4 hours of testimony on a 5-2 vote with myself, Councilmember Kalantari Johnson, Councilmember Brunner and Brown and Watkins. We all voted in favor of having this issue agendized for January the 9th. We took additional action that council members Brown and Brunner had volunteered to work with the community to see if they could come up with a resolution that would work. And then, as is oftentimes the case, that does not limit the council to only those two people working on it. Hundreds of people continued to contact myself and the rest of the council talking about the kind of resolution they thought might make sense. And we heard from hundreds and hundreds of people in that regard. So both council members Brunner and Brown brought forward a resolution from their discussions with people, which were very much like the rest of the discussions. They didn't hold public meetings or community conversations or anything. They met privately with people, So did many of the rest of us. All members of the council ended up doing that. So there were, as it turned out, 2 resolutions in front of the council. One was the ceasefire resolution. One was the peace resolution. The ceasefire resolution had much more detail in it than the peace resolution did.
It had, I think, 800 words, and you can read it online if you go.
Yeah, you can read both
Yeah.
resolutions online. And at least in my judgment, each council member can explain their vote. But in my judgment, the peace resolution was more balanced than the ceasefire resolution. And I want to point out that although I would guess something on the order of 70% of the people who spoke during the 10-hour public comment period on January 9th and 10th, I would say about 70% of those folks spoke in favor of the ceasefire resolution. When we take all of the public comment that came in from the time the resolutions were made public on the Friday prior to the Tuesday meeting, all of the correspondence, emails, voicemails, snail mail, and the comments that were made on the night of, actually about 60% of the communications that we received were not in favor of the ceasefire resolution. So I want to be very careful. About 70% of the people who showed up were in favor of it, but that was not the majority opinion in terms of the communication that council members received. So for me, I was trying to think forward. What is the city council? How are we going to operate next Tuesday and the Tuesday after that and the Tuesday after that and the Tuesday after that, when we're back to the issues of homelessness, affordable housing, local economic development, climate change actions we can take locally, moving on with the adopted Wharf Master Plan, repairing and figuring out what to do with West Cliff, all of the issues that are clearly within our jurisdiction. What is the best thing to do on these resolutions relative to getting back to work on local government issues? And for me, the answer to that was to vote for the peace resolution.
I think that you can understand the anguish and the angst and the sadness and the inability to direct it anywhere that people are feeling, that expressed it so loudly at the city council meeting, and you listen to the feelings and they seem to boil over at a certain point into shouting and other physical acts of violence, broken windows. But the feelings, when they get that strong, I think it was a decision to keep the council going or not, and those are difficult decisions, I'm sure.
Keep the council going or not? I'm not clear.
Keep the public comment period open for 10 hours. Watsonville recently decided to only give an hour and then table it for a special meeting. And I'm wondering if you had it to rewind, whether you would have done something similar or whether you just do it all the same.
No. I have a commitment to hearing anybody and everybody who wants to comment on any item in front of the city council. And I'm not going to start putting artificial limits on that. Just think for a moment, had I 5 hours into the 10 hours of testimony said, well, we keep hearing the same thing over and over and over again from people who are reading from their cell phones, their comments, which are literally exactly the same as the previous speaker and the previous speaker. If I had said, we're not hearing anything new here, I think we'll just now end the public comment, I think that would have gone over terribly. Similarly, if I had 5 or 7 or 8 hours into it said, we've heard 200 and some people now, much of it repetitive, so instead of 2 minutes each, the rest of you get 1 minute each.
I understand you're in a pretty untenable position.
I'm not going to do that. I've never done that as a presiding officer, and I'm not going to start now.
And I'm not saying, since I wasn't there, that Watsonville did that, but I did read they had 1 hour, and I wasn't making a comment.
Well, let's be clear on what Watsonville did. Watsonville is back in the December 12th phase. What they were doing the other night was accepting oral communication because they didn't have anything on the agenda. We had 4 hours of that on December 12th to ask us to do something on January 9th. So they're way behind on this, and that it's their timing. So what they did the other night was they took 1 hour of oral communication regarding whether or not to have a future council item on that.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Andrew Goldenkrantz has an editorial in Lookout Santa Cruz, and the headline is, "I would expect this at a MAGA rally, but here our community behaved abominably over the Israel-Hamas resolution." It's quite a long article. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but his thesis is we're better than that, and we can't start calling each other evil. But people did, and there was, I wasn't there, but I read a lot of articles from different angles, and they all seem to say that there was a lot of throwing of things and breaking of 2 windows, and then you got a death threat. So I don't know if you've read Andrew Goldenkrantz.
Of course I have.
Or whether you share his perspective, but I wondered what your takeaway is and how we go forward after that kind of interaction with the public, and in your case. And I want to get into specifically the death threat you got, but I don't want to go there yet. I want to talk about just the tone of the verbal shouting that people did after they did not get their way.
Well, so let's rewind this to 5 o'clock on January the 9th, when we had set this matter for a public discussion. 5 o'clock, the council chambers were packed. There were hundreds of people outside the council chambers. Some people had suggested we should move it to the Civic. The reason I thought that was not a good idea is that would have eliminated all of the online participation. And we toggled back and forth between people online and people in person. The reason that I think that's so important is if you are disabled, if you are a senior, if you have to work, there are 1,000 reasons why people would want their voice heard but not be able to show up at the city council meeting. So I thought it was just fine to keep, and I still believe that, to keep going in the council chambers, and as people testified, they would leave and other people would come in. So everybody got in who wanted to speak, and they were able to speak. And as the evening went on, I think it is fair to say that there was a great amount of repetition, but that's people's choice, what they want to say. It's not my place, I think, to say, well, we only want to hear from people who have something new to say.
But I'm talking about actions and the escalation.
So let me get to that. There were people with strong feelings on both sides of this. Most of the people who showed up were in favor of the ceasefire resolution. That was not the entirety of the communication we received, but most people who showed up were in favor of the ceasefire resolution. I think that as the night wore on, people got tired, and I understand that. But I have an iron butt, and I can sit there for 10 hours without getting up from my seat as the presiding officer and welcome everyone and thank everyone who was there who wanted to speak. At the very end, when we took our vote, that's when things moved way off the page of a civilized and civil conversation and moved to the place where people engaged in threats of violence and actual violence. They threw things at the city council members. They broke windows. They assaulted a police officer. They did a number of things that were terrible. But let's be clear on who the they is we're talking about. We're talking about probably 36 people out of hundreds who were there and hundreds who testified. And so it's not my place to tar everyone with the same brush. I won't do that. But what was clear was the people who were engaged in violence and threats of violence were people who were all on one side of the issue. And they'll have to answer for themselves. It's not my place to do anything other than observe that. But I think there is a difference between getting your say and getting your way.
Can you expand on what you mean by that?
Sure. I've cast tens of thousands of votes in my public life as a county supervisor, as a state legislator, and now as mayor. It's very rare that everybody gets their way. People get their say on all sides of an issue, but it is rare for everybody to get their way. Some people who were there on the morning of the 10th at 3:30 in the morning apparently confused getting your say with getting your way. The democracy, the way I'm as a presiding officer in our little democracy here in the city of Santa Cruz, is to make sure everybody gets their say. That is not a guarantee that everybody's going to get their way. And this is a community which I believe, I don't fear any contradiction on this. This is not a community that is going to support threats of violence and violence as a way of getting your way.
So let's talk about the worst of that spectrum was someone threatened to kill you for your vote or the way you handled it.
Right.
Tell me, if you can, because I want to get to some other topics before we close, about that particular moment for you when you took that call. You were home?
I was on another call, and this call came in and went to voicemail on my personal telephone. And when I then got off the phone and listened to the message, it was clear and unambiguous, repeatedly threatening my life for voting for the peace initiative and not voting for the ceasefire initiative. It wasn't some random call about just life in general or city council work in general. It was very specific to the vote that I cast and not having cast a vote in favor of the ceasefire resolution. Repeatedly in the phone message, a threat to kill me, and specifically to stab me. And I'm a 73-year-old man, and my wife is 70. And when we got that message and listened to it, we were both concerned. And so I called the police who came over. They transferred the recording from my phone to their phone. They opened up a felony investigation of threat against the life of a public official in the performance of their duty, which is a separate crime. They were able to identify where that came from. They stopped the vehicle that had the person who made the death threat to me and that person's father. And they interviewed them, and they acknowledged that, yes, the young man had admitted that he was the one who had made the death threat to me. The police advised me of that and continued their investigation. Yesterday, the father and son called me jointly, called the same number. I took their call. They expressed deep sorrow and regret for what had happened, and offered to give me a letter of apology. I said that I appreciated that, and I thought that maybe the best way for us to do that was to meet in my office, which we did at 4:15 this afternoon. Both gentlemen came in. They gave me a letter, which you now have, and we agreed to a joint statement that we would also release. We had a very productive conversation between us, not only about the incident, but about the Middle East, about politics in general and the nature of it in the country these days. And it was a very positive conversation. And what I'm pleased about with all of this is that now the police can close this investigation. The district attorney doesn't have to figure out whether or not to prosecute. I'm not interested in that. That instead of this young man's life being tarnished going forward for the rest of his life, the three of us have worked it out in a civil and civilized way, where we can disagree without being disagreeable, where we can talk about both our thoughts and our feelings, and now move on. And I'm very grateful to the young man and his father for the peaceful way we've ended this with each other.
One of the posts I saw on social media went like this. No one has ever changed a social situation by being polite. That we always have to act outside the status quo in order to make change happen. This is on the same day that Martin Luther King's march happened that this was posted, and I thought it was a bit ironic because it seems like, and I think Andrew Goldenkrantz points this out in his editorial, that Martin Luther King wouldn't have condoned any of what you just described. He was a very big proponent of nonviolent disobedience, yes, but nonviolent was the first word. And next week, I'm going to have someone from the Resource Center for Nonviolence on to talk about this moment we seem to find ourselves in, where someone believed that doxing the city council, meaning publishing their addresses, was okay. I don't know where they got that idea, that was going to create social change, but they did, and it's hard to undo those once they're out in the internet. And I just wonder, in the little bit of time we have left, if we could reflect a little bit more broadly on, why people feel like it's okay to do that, but then Moms for Liberty comes and screams at a school board meeting, and everyone's up in arms about that, probably rightfully, because screaming at a public meeting in general seems counterproductive and will not get your best points across if you're yelling and you don't kind of try to communicate effectively, or you threaten people. So I wondered about your thoughts about the tone that is seeping in to even Santa Cruz discourse in a way that we're not used to. I would say we've been pretty good, even when we disagree. People don't threaten one another or dox them. So I'm hoping this is an aberration because of people's anguish about the situation, rightfully so, in the Middle East. That they're just in pain over what they see, and they feel incredibly helpless, as many of us do, and angry at our own administration for funding it.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know where else to turn because they're getting form letters from their representatives up higher in the Congress. So what are your closing thoughts here about where do we go from here? How do we do what you did at this individual as a community so that we can try to tone down the heat and get some more light?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there is a long, storied, and healthy tradition in the United States of civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance. A very long, proud history. Some of the most important progress that's been made in this country was made in large part because of that. Whether it's the '64 Civil Rights Act, whether it is around, we can go back further and look at a woman's right to vote. We can look at the history of the country and see that nonviolent civil disobedience has been very helpful in fostering and encouraging important political and social change in our country. The line, for me, is very clear and very bright. Nonviolent civil disobedience is very different than violence or the threats of violence to get your way. That is not something that I believe is encouraged by people in this community. When people say they're frustrated, they're angry, they're whatever, I've been in 4 elective offices. I myself get frustrated, angry from time to time doing this work. It happens. It's in the nature of the work. People can disagree, but they need to disagree without being disagreeable, and they need to do it in a way that it does not use violence or the threats of violence. To me, that is never acceptable.
Well, thank you, Fred, for taking the time in your busy schedule to come and share this letter with us. We'll probably read it in the paper in the morning. And we'll have you back again, hopefully in more better circumstances.
I'm always pleased to be here, and I think this is an important topic. I understand what's going on in the community about it. I think I understand it, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Thanks for coming in. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. This is KSQD Santa Cruz, KSQT Prunedale, your community radio station for the Monterey Bay and beyond. And you can hear all of our programs in the archive section of our website for 2 weeks. We also post them online. And remember, we're streaming live on the web at ksqd.org. I want to thank Nyanko for helping me out today. And here is First Person Singular.